It happened on a crisp Sunday afternoon, the kind where autumn whispers promises of change. My son Michael's colonial-style home buzzed with energy as relatives gathered for my grandson Ethan's 16th birthday celebration. I had spent 3 days preparing his favorite 3-layer chocolate cake, decorating it with miniature soccer players, a nod to his passion. As I stood in the corner of their expansive kitchen, arranging appetizers I'd brought, my arthritic hands working despite the pain, I heard it. My son's voice, low but clear, drifting from the adjacent dining room where he thought no one could hear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She's too old to matter now, Michael told his wife Jennifer. My mother just slows everything down. We should have hired caterers instead of letting her insist on cooking. Jennifer's response was softer, indistinct, but I caught her gentle protest. "It's one afternoon," she murmured. "Your mother loves to feel needed." "That's exactly the problem," Michael replied with a sigh that cut through me like winter wind. "She's becoming more dependent, more desperate to be involved. It's exhausting." I froze, my hands suspended above the tray of deviled eggs I'd prepared from scratch using my grandmother's recipe. The same recipe I'd taught Michael to make when he was 9, standing on a step stool in our old kitchen, his small hands carefully scooping filling. Now those same hands were dismissing me as irrelevant, as burden, as old. I didn't drop anything. I didn't gasp or cry out. Instead, something inside me hardened quietly, like cement setting. I placed the last deviled egg on the tray with steady hands, smoothed my cardigan, the teal one Michael had given me 3 Christmases ago with a card that read, "To the best mom ever," and walked out through the side door without a word. No one saw me leave. No one called after me. I drove home in silence, the cake carrier empty on my passenger seat. The radio remained off. I didn't need music to accompany the words replaying in my head. She's too old to matter now. Once home, I made tea I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table. My fingers traced over the worn oak surface, the same table where I'd helped Michael with science projects and college applications. The table where I'd signed the mortgage papers after Harold died, taking on the financial burden alone so Michael could finish college without debt. I opened my laptop, the one Michael had insisted on buying me last year because he claimed my old one embarrassed him when his colleagues visited, and logged into my online banking account. There it was, $187,540.36. The house down payment fund I'd been building for 5 years, saving every penny from my teacher's pension and the sale of my jewelry, including my wedding ring. The fund I'd planned to give Michael and Jennifer when they were ready to move from their beautiful but too small colonial to the lakeside property they'd been eyeing. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I clicked transfer funds and whispered to myself, if I'm too old to matter, then perhaps my money is too old to spend. Before we begin this journey together, I'd like to invite you to share in the comments where you're watching from. Your presence here matters to me, and if my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing for more true stories of transformation. It's strange how a single moment can split your life in 2, before and after. Before Michael's words, I was Eleanor Wilson, 68, retired high school literature teacher, widow, mother, grandmother, and self-appointed family caretaker. I baked birthday cakes, remembered anniversaries, hosted holiday dinners, and kept everyone's favorite snacks in my pantry. I was the family's emotional center, the keeper of traditions, the one who sent handwritten cards and kept photo albums, meticulously updated. After those words, I became someone else, someone I'm still getting to know. I met Harold in college, both of us English majors with dreams of writing novels while teaching young minds to love literature. We married young, had Michael when I was 24, and settled into a modest life in Mapleton. Harold taught at the community college while I took a position at Mapleton High School. We saved diligently for Michael's college fund, taking second jobs during summers rather than vacations. When Michael was 16, the same age Ethan is now, Harold died suddenly from an aneurysm. One moment he was grading papers at this very kitchen table, the next he was gone, leaving behind half-finished comments on student essays and a family entirely unprepared for his absence. I didn't have time to fall apart. Michael needed stability, needed college, needed a chance at the life Harold and I had planned for him. So I sold our small vacation cabin in the mountains, took on extra classes, and tutored on weekends. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years, so Michael could have the right clothes for interviews. I skipped dental work so he could study abroad in London for a semester. When he graduated and landed his first job at the marketing firm, I felt such pride it nearly overwhelmed me. When he met Jennifer during a business trip to Chicago, I welcomed her immediately, sensing her kindness and intelligence. When they married, I handled most of the arrangements, freeing them to focus on their careers. And when Ethan was born, I reorganized my entire life. I retired early to help with childcare, driving 45 minutes each way, 3 days a week, so they could save on daycare costs. I learned to make organic baby food from scratch when Jennifer read about pesticides in commercial brands. I researched developmental toys and read endless books on modern childcare, determined not to be the kind of grandmother who imposed outdated methods. I never complained, never mentioned the arthritis that made those drives increasingly painful, never calculated the thousands of hours or tens of thousands of dollars I'd invested. That's not what mothers do. We give without the expectation of return because the giving itself brings joy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Or at least, that's what I believed until I heard those words. The first sign of change had come gradually, so subtly I almost missed it. Michael used to call me every Sunday evening, a tradition we'd started when he left, for college. Those calls were sacred to me. I would make tea, settle into my reading chair, and savor every detail of his life. We'd talk about books, films, politics, and family memories. Those calls anchored my week. About 2 years ago, the calls began shortening. 90 minutes became 60, then 30, then perfunctory 10-minute check-ins where Michael sounded, perpetually distracted, often mentioning he was simultaneously sending work emails. "Mom, you understand how busy things get," he'd say when I once gently noted the change. "We can't always chat like I'm still in college." I assured him I understood completely. I didn't mention how I structured my Sundays around his calls, or how I saved interesting news articles throughout the week to share with him. Then the calls became sporadic. Sometimes he'd text instead, "Crazy week, can't talk tonight, we'll call next Sunday." Sometimes next Sunday would come and go without contact. When I called him, I'd often get voicemail. "Don't take it personally," my friend Diane advised over coffee. "Kids get busy with their own lives. It's normal." So I adapted. I joined a book club that met on Sunday evenings. I volunteered at the library's literacy program. I filled the spaces he'd left empty. Last Thanksgiving, I noticed another shift. For 20 years, I'd hosted the family holiday at my home. I'd spend weeks preparing, polishing the silver that had been my mother's, bringing out the hand-embroidered tablecloth, cooking everyone's favorites. Michael loved my cornbread stuffing with chestnuts and sausage. Jennifer always requested extra cranberry orange relish. Ethan devoured my Parker House rolls. 2 weeks before last Thanksgiving, Michael called. "Mom, we've been thinking. Your house is getting a bit small for everyone, and you work so hard on these dinners. We'd like to host this year." It was thoughtfully phrased, yet I felt the underlying message: your home isn't good enough anymore. Still, I smiled through the phone. "That sounds lovely. What can I bring?" "Actually," he hesitated, Jennifer's been working with a caterer at her company events. We thought we'd have it professionally done this year. You can just relax and enjoy. I brought a pie anyway. Maple bourbon pecan, Michael's favorite since childhood. It remained largely untouched amid the caterer's elaborate dessert spread. At the end of the evening, Jennifer kindly wrapped a slice for me to take home. "So you can enjoy it tomorrow," she said, not realizing I'd made it. The dinner itself was beautiful but strange. Fine china I didn't recognize. Foods I couldn't pronounce. Wine served in what looked like laboratory beakers. Michael's colleagues from the firm joined us, people who talked about campaigns and metrics and engagement while I sat quietly, finding no entry point into their conversations. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. On D. My way back, I overheard Michael in the kitchen with one of his colleagues. "Your mom seems sweet," the woman said, loading her plate with another helping. "She is," Michael replied. "A bit old-fashioned, but she means well." Old-fashioned. The word clung to me like a burr. Was that how he saw me now? A relic? A quaint reminder of less sophisticated times? When I returned to the table, I smiled brighter, laughed a little louder, tried a little harder. No one seemed to notice. Later that week, I enrolled in a digital media class at the community center. I learned about Instagram and Twitter and something called TikTok. I created accounts I barely used but understood enough to reference in conversations. I downloaded Spotify and familiarized myself with music Michael mentioned. I read business journals so I could ask intelligent questions about his work. The effort exhausted me, yet yielded little. Our conversations remained surface level. My questions about his campaigns were answered with polite but brief explanations that often ended with, "It's complicated, Mom. Industry stuff." Christmas brought another shift. For years, I'd carefully selected gifts that reflected thoughtfulness and personal connection. Books by authors he'd enjoyed, sweaters in colors that complemented his eyes, framed photographs of meaningful moments. Last Christmas, I spent weeks knitting him a cashmere scarf in subtle gray and blue stripes. Michael and Jennifer gave me a gift card to a department store. The accompanying card read, "So you can pick out whatever you need. Love, Michael, Jennifer, and Ethan." The lack of personalization stung, but I told myself they were busy. Gift cards were practical. I was being overly sentimental. Then came January, and my birthday. For 15 years since Harold died, Michael had taken me to dinner on my birthday, just the two of us. It was our tradition. We'd go to Salvatore's, the small Italian restaurant where Harold and I had celebrated our anniversaries. Michael would order champagne and toast to another year. This January, the day came and went without mention. 3 days later, a flower arrangement arrived with a card. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry we've been swamped. Rain check on dinner? Love, Michael and family." The rain check was never scheduled. When I called to thank him for the flowers, he sounded rushed, distracted. "I'm heading into a meeting, Mom. Can I call you back?" He didn't. I began to realize I was disappearing from my son's life. Not dramatically, not with a clean break, but gradually, incrementally, one forgotten call and missed tradition at a time. I was being erased through 1,000 small omissions. Still, I persisted. I sent articles I thought might interest him. I texted photos of things that reminded me of his childhood. I mailed Ethan care packages at summer camp with handwritten notes and homemade cookies. I attended Ethan's soccer games and piano recitals, arriving early to secure good seats, taking photos I'd later organize into albums no one asked to see. I showed up. I remained present. I kept loving loudly even, as the echoes grew fainter. Perhaps that's why the words hurt so deeply. Not just "she's too old to matter now," but the exhaustion in his voice when he said it. As if my love, my presence, my effort to remain connected was a burden rather than a gift. In the week after Ethan's birthday party, I made no contact with Michael or his family. I waited, curious if they'd notice my silence, if they'd reach out with concern. My phone remained quiet except for book club reminders and pharmacy prescription alerts. On the 8th day, Michael texted, "Mom, did you take the cake when you left?" Ethan was looking forward to it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We missed you." Just a question about cake. I stared at the message for an hour before replying. "No, I left it in the kitchen. Perhaps someone moved it." He didn't respond. The silence extended to 2 weeks. During that time, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called a real estate agent, not to sell my home, but to look at properties for myself. Not modest condos suitable for aging widows, but vibrant, sunny places with room for growth. "What exactly are you looking for?" asked Sandra, the agent recommended by my book club friend. "Something that makes me feel like I'm just beginning," I replied. She showed me 5 properties. The one that caught my heart was a small craftsman cottage near the Arts District downtown. 2 bedrooms, a sun porch, and most importantly, a detached studio in the backyard with north-facing windows. Perfect for an art studio. It needed work, certainly. The kitchen was outdated, the bathroom fixtures ancient. But the bones were good, and something about it whispered possibilities. "This neighborhood is getting quite trendy," Sandra cautioned. "Lots of young professionals and artists. The average homeowner here is probably 30 years younger than you." I smiled. Good, I could use some youth in my life. The asking. Price was exactly $175,000. Below my fund balance, leaving me enough for modest renovations and a financial cushion. I made an offer that afternoon. When I returned home, there was a voicemail from Michael. "Mom, calling to check in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Also, we're starting to look more seriously at that lakefront property. Remember we talked about it? Anyway, give me a call when you can." We hadn't talked about it. He'd mentioned it once, in passing, months ago. But he assumed I'd been keeping track, that his dreams remained at the forefront of my mind even as I disappeared from his. I didn't call back immediately. Instead, I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began to write, something I hadn't done since college. Not a letter to Michael, not yet. Instead, I wrote about a woman in her 60s who wakes up one day and realizes she's been saving her real life for later, for a time that might never come. The words flowed easily, surprisingly so. I wrote until midnight, stopping only when my eyes grew too heavy to see the screen. In the morning, I read what I'd written and found it good, flawed but honest, raw but hopeful. I repeated this the next day and the next. By the end of the week, I had 30 pages of what might become a memoir, or perhaps a novel. I wasn't sure yet, but for the first time in decades I was writing for myself, not grading others' work or editing Michael's. College essays. My phone rang several times during those writing sessions. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Each time, I let it go to voicemail, promising myself I would call him back when I finished my day's writing. Sometimes, absorbed in words, I forgot. His messages grew increasingly confused, then concerned, then mildly irritated. "Mom, what's going on? Are you avoiding me? Jennifer says you're not answering her texts either." I hadn't received any texts from Jennifer. Perhaps they'd been sent, perhaps not. It didn't seem important. On day 10 of my writing retreat, my real estate agent called. "They've accepted your offer," Sandra exclaimed. "We can close in 30 days if you're ready." I was ready. That evening, I finally called Michael back. "Mom, where have you been?" His voice held an edge of annoyance poorly disguised as concern. "I've been calling for days." "I've been busy," I said simply. "Busy? With what?" The genuine confusion in his voice might have hurt me once. Now it merely confirmed what I already knew. Writing, actually, and buying a new house. Silence on the line, then, You're selling your house? Since when? Why wouldn't you talk to me about something like that? I'm not selling this house yet. I've purchased a second property. More silence, longer this time. Is this about money? Are you having financial problems? Because you know you can always come live with us if things get tight. The offer, which wasn't really an offer at all, but a reflexive gesture, landed like a stone. Come live with them. Become the old woman in the spare room, emerging for meals, grateful for inclusion. My finances are fine, Michael. I've bought a cottage near the Arts District. It has a studio where I can paint. Paint? Since when do you paint? I don't. Yet. But I'm going to learn. His laughter was short, uncomfortable. Mom, what's really going on? Is this some kind of, I don't know, crisis? I considered the question seriously. Was it a crisis? The word implied devastation, breakdown, collapse. What I felt was the opposite, a building up, a breakthrough, an expansion. It's a beginning, I said finally. At 68? Mom, be realistic. This isn't the time to make drastic changes. You should be thinking about security, about the future. There it was again. The dismissal wrapped in concern, the limitation presented as wisdom. I heard you, I said quietly. At Ethan's party, I heard what you said to Jennifer about me. The sharp intake of breath told me he knew exactly what I meant. Mom, that wasn't, you misunderstood. I understood perfectly. I'm too old to matter now. I'm exhausting. Those were your exact words. It was a stressful day. Didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? He fumbled for words, settling finally on, you're taking this too personally. I laughed then, a genuine laugh that surprised us both. How else should I take it, Michael? It was about me, spoken by my son. Look, can we talk about this in person? And what about the lakefront property? We were going to discuss the down payment fund you've been saving. My hand tightened on the phone. There's been a change of plans. What does that mean? It means the money I saved is no longer available for your lakefront house. I've invested it elsewhere. You spent our house fund without even talking to me? His voice rose, indignation replacing confusion. Mom, we've been counting on that money. We've already started working with a realtor. The word struck me, like a physical blow. Our house fund. As if my years of saving, my decision to sell my wedding ring, my careful budgeting had created some kind of joint asset, some communal resource he had rights to. It was never our house fund, Michael. It was my money that I intended as a gift. Gifts are given, not owed. I can't believe you're being this selfish, he said, voice tight with anger. After everything we've done for you. I waited for him to elaborate on what exactly they had done for me, but he didn't continue. I need to go, I said. I have a writing class at the community center tonight. A writing class? Mom? What is happening to you? What indeed? The transformation felt simultaneously sudden and long overdue, like a spring thaw after an extended winter. I'm remembering who I was before I was just your mother, I said, and I'm discovering who I might become now. I ended the call before he could respond. My hands were steady, my heart rate normal. There was no sweeping drama to the moment. No cinematic crescendo, just a quiet shift, like turning the page to a new chapter. I gathered my notebook and pen, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, and saw a woman I was beginning to recognize again. Not young, certainly. The silver in my hair caught the light. The lines around my eyes deepened when I smiled. But my eyes themselves, they held something new. Or perhaps something very old, finally remembered. As I drove to my writing class, I realized I wasn't angry with Michael. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But anger required energy I now preferred. to invest elsewhere. Instead, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. His words, cruel as they were, had cracked open the shell I'd built around myself. The shell of self-sacrifice, of diminished expectations, of invisible service. Through that crack, light was now pouring in. I parked outside the community center and sat for a moment watching people filter in, mostly women, mostly my age or older, each carrying notebooks or laptops, each step containing a story. I wondered how many of them had also been told, in words or silent actions, that they were too old to matter. I wondered how many were just now discovering that wasn't true. The community center writing class became my sanctuary over the next few weeks. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I joined 12 other aspiring writers in a fluorescent-lit room with inspirational posters and the lingering scent of the afternoon children's art class. Our instructor, Vivian, was a published poet in her 70s with cropped silver hair and an impressive collection of handcrafted jewelry. She moved with the confident grace of someone who had stopped apologizing for the space she occupied in the world. "Writing isn't about talent," she told us on the first day. "It's about courage. The courage to tell your truth even when no one has asked to hear it." Those words resonated in my chest like a tuning fork struck against stone. How long had I been silent? How many truths had I swallowed to maintain peace, to avoid inconveniencing others, to remain the reliable, undemanding mother who never caused trouble? My classmates became unexpected allies in my transformation. There was Thomas, a retired mailman documenting his 40 years of observations from neighborhood routes. Diana, recently divorced after 38 years, writing a science fiction novel about a world where marriage contracts expired every decade. Ken, a widower like me, crafting essays about raising his daughters alone. And Sophia, at 82 the oldest in our group, working on her memoirs with chapter titles like The Loves I Chose and The Loves I Refused. None of them treated me like I was too old for anything. When I shared the first chapter of what I was now calling my reinvention memoir, they leaned forward in their chairs, nodding in recognition, offering specific praise alongside gentle suggestions. "The way you described that moment of hearing your son's words, I felt that in my bones," said Diana. "But I'm curious about what came before. Were there earlier signs you'd started to dismiss?" Her question unlocked something. I went home and wrote furiously about all the warning signals I'd ignored. The shortened phone calls, the forgotten birthdays, the way Michael's eyes glazed over when I spoke. Each example clarified the pattern I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Meanwhile, my cottage purchase proceeded smoothly. The inspection revealed some electrical issues and a minor roof leak, but nothing catastrophic. I negotiated repairs with the seller and signed the final paperwork 3 weeks after my initial offer. The day I received the keys, I drove directly from the closing to the property, now officially mine. Standing alone in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through windows that needed washing, I felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. The space held no memories yet. No Christmas mornings, no Sunday dinners, no movie nights with Michael sprawled on the couch as a teenager. Its walls hadn't absorbed decades of conversations or witnessed milestones. It was a blank canvas awaiting new stories. I walked through each room slowly, touching door frames, testing floorboards, imagining possibilities. The kitchen needed updating, but its worn butcher block counters had character. The main bedroom featured a bay window perfect for a reading nook. The second bedroom would make an ideal guest room, or perhaps an office for the writing projects. Now filling my days, the backyard studio captivated me most. Previous owners had used it as an artist's workspace, evident from the paint splatters on the concrete floor and the built-in shelving along one wall. Standing in its center, I closed my eyes and imagined it filled with light, with color, with creation. I hadn't mentioned the cottage to Michael again since our tense phone conversation. He had called twice afterward, leaving messages that progressed from anger to stilted concern. "Mom, we need to discuss this house fund situation. Call me back." Then, 3 days later, Mom, Jennifer thinks I should check on you. Are you doing okay? I had returned both calls when I knew he'd be at work, leaving equally brief messages. Michael, I'm fine. Just busy with my writing class and house hunting. Michael, no need to worry. I'm making some positive changes in my life. Neither of us mentioned his words at the birthday party. The wound they'd created hung between us, unaddressed but palpable. As I stood in my new studio, I realized I needed to break this pattern of avoidance. Not with dramatic confrontation, but with simple honesty. I pulled out my phone and texted him. I've purchased a cottage near the Arts District. The address is 247 Maple Lane. I'm planning a small housewarming next Saturday at 2 p.m. You, Jennifer, and Ethan are welcome to come. His response came hours later. A cottage? Mom, are you sure about this? That neighborhood is pretty urban. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of this significant purchase. Just doubt, just concern framed as wisdom. I replied, I'm sure. The invitation stands. Then I put my phone away and began measuring the studio windows for curtains. The week before, my housewarming party passed in a blur of activity. I hired painters for the living room and bedroom, choosing colors I'd always loved but had never used in my previous home. A warm terracotta for the living room and a serene blue-gray for the bedroom. I purchased a new mattress, not the practical firm one I'd shared with Harold, but a luxurious pillow top that felt like sleeping on a cloud. I visited second-hand shops and estate sales, hunting for furniture with character. A velvet armchair, in deep emerald green. A teak coffee table with intricate inlay. A vintage desk for my studio with dozens of tiny drawers. Each purchase felt like an act of self-definition. Who was Eleanor Wilson when she chose for herself alone? What colors made her smile? What textures pleased her fingertips? What objects sparked joy or curiosity or comfort? I was discovering that my tastes ran more eclectic, more vibrant, more adventurous than the careful conventional decor of my previous home. There, I'd chosen subdued tones and practical fabrics, creating a space that welcomed others without imposing too much personality. Here, I selected items that spoke to me directly, without filtering my choices through the imagined preferences of visitors. For my studio, I purchased basic art supplies: acrylic paints, canvases, brushes of various sizes, charcoal pencils. I had no illusions about becoming a great artist at 68, but the thought of color and texture and creation called to me. My friend Diane from book club recommended an introductory painting class at the local art center, and I signed up for sessions beginning the following month. The morning of my housewarming, I woke early, sunlight filtering through my new gauzy curtains. I lay in bed for a moment, savoring the unfamiliar ceiling, the distant sounds of my new neighborhood. Someone practicing saxophone, a dog barking, the rumble of a delivery truck. City sounds, vibrant and varied, so different from the quiet suburban street where I'd lived for 40 years. I prepared simple refreshments for my guests: a cheese board with local selections from the farmer's market, fresh bread, fruit, and homemade lemonade. Nothing elaborate, nothing that required hours in the kitchen or showcased domestic virtuosity. Just good food meant for sharing. At 1:30, my first guests arrived, Vivian and 3 others from my writing class. They brought houseplants, bottles of wine, and handmade cards with quotes about new beginnings. They wandered through my cottage, offering genuine compliments and gentle suggestions. "This space has such good energy," Sophia declared, running her hand along the freshly painted wall. "It feels like you." "Like me?" I echoed, surprised. "I'm not sure I know what that means yet." She patted my arm. "You will." By 2:15, a dozen people filled my small living room: book club friends, former teaching colleagues, neighbors from my old street who'd become genuine friends over the decades. Their presence warmed the new space, their voices christening it with laughter and conversation. By 3 o'clock, Michael and his family hadn't arrived. I tried not to watch the door, tried not to check my phone too obviously. I engaged with my guests, showed them the studio, accepted their kind housewarming gifts. But a small, persistent ache lodged beneath my breastbone. At 3:30, Diana pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Are you expecting someone else?" She asked gently. "My son and his family," I admitted. "But they're probably busy." She studied my face. "Their loss. This place is magical, Eleanor, like watching a butterfly emerge." Her words soothed the ache without erasing it. Yes, Michael's absence hurt. Of course it did. But it didn't diminish what I was building here. As the party wound down around 5, I stood on my front porch waving goodbye to the last guests. A silver SUV pulled up, Michael's car. My heart leaped, then steadied. They were late, but they had come. Michael emerged first, his expression unreadable. Jennifer followed, offering a tentative smile. Ethan slouched out last, thumbs busy on his phone. "Sorry we're late," Jennifer said, reaching to hug me. "Ethan's soccer tournament ran over." "The party's over," Michael noted, glancing at the departing cars. "You should have told us it started earlier." "I did," I said simply. "The invitation said 2 o'clock. He frowned. "Well, we're here now. Can we still see the place?" I nodded and led them inside, suddenly seeing my cottage through their eyes. The bold colors, the eclectic furniture, the half-unpacked boxes, the emerging identity of a woman they might not recognize. "It's colorful," Jennifer offered, clearly struggling to find something positive to say. Michael walked through the room silently, hands in his pockets. When he reached the studio, he paused in the doorway. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing to the art supplies arranged on the desk. "I'm taking a painting class," I explained. "I thought I'd try something new." He turned to face me, his expression a complex mixture of confusion, concern, and something else, perhaps fear. "Mom, what's really going on? First the writing, now painting this house. This isn't like you." "That's the point, Michael. I'm discovering what is like me. Not who I was as your mother, but who I am as myself." "Because of what you overheard?" His voice lowered. "Look, I said something thoughtless in a stressful moment. It wasn't worth all this." I considered his words carefully. Was this all because of what I'd overheard? Yes and no. His words had been the catalyst, the final confirmation of a pattern I'd been ignoring. But the seeds of change had been planted long before, in every shortened phone call, every forgotten birthday, every moment I'd felt myself fading from importance in his life. "This isn't about punishment," I said finally. "It's about recognition." I recognized something that day in your kitchen, not just about how you see me, but about how I've seen myself, as an extension of you, of your needs, as someone whose purpose was to support your dreams, even at the expense of my own. "You're my mother," he said, as if that explained everything. "That's what mothers do." "No, Michael, that's what I chose to do, often at great personal cost. And I don't regret those choices. But I'm more than just your mother. I always have been." Ethan wandered into the studio, finally looking up from his phone. "This place is actually kind of cool, Grandma," he said, examining the art supplies. "Are you really going to paint stuff?" His genuine interest, free from judgment or confusion, lightened the moment. "That's the plan, though I have no idea if I'll be any good." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter if you're good, just matters if you like doing it." Out of the mouths of teenagers, unexpected wisdom that silenced both me and his father. We completed the tour in awkward silence. In the living room, Jennifer noticed the cheese board with its remnants of the party. "Oh, we missed the food," she said. "It looks like it was lovely." There's plenty left, I offered. And lemonade in the fridge. Would you like some? They stayed for 30 uncomfortable minutes, Jennifer making valiant efforts at conversation, Ethan periodically emerging from his phone to ask surprisingly thoughtful questions about the neighborhood, Michael mostly silent, eyes roaming the unfamiliar space as if searching for the mother he recognized. As they prepared to leave, I walked them to the door. Michael hung back as Jennifer and Ethan headed to the car. "Mom," he said quietly, "about the house fund. I know it's your money. I shouldn't have assumed. It's just, we've been planning for that lakefront property for so long. It felt like a shared dream." "I know," I acknowledged, "and I'm sorry for the disappointment. But this cottage, these classes, they're my dream. One I've deferred for decades." He nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Are you going to sell the house, the one I grew up in?" "Eventually, probably, but not immediately." He seemed to want to say more but settled for a stiff hug before joining his family in the car. I watched them drive away, wondering what conversations would follow in their home that evening. Would Michael see this transformation as betrayal? As abandonment? As his mother losing her mind in her advancing years? Or would he perhaps begin to see me as a person separate from his needs? A person with dreams and desires and a future still unfolding? I couldn't control his interpretation. That realization, simple but profound, settled over me like a warm blanket. I could not manage Michael's feelings about my choices. I never could, though I'd exhausted myself trying for decades. The next morning, I woke early again, this time to the sound of rain pattering against my new roof. I made coffee in my second-hand percolator and carried it to the studio, where I sat at my desk watching raindrops trace patterns down the windows. I opened my laptop and began to write, not about Michael this time, but about rain, about stillness, about listening to the rhythms of water and breath and heartbeat, about the courage required to hear your own voice amid the noise of others' expectations. The words flowed easily, tumbling onto the screen with unexpected grace. I wrote for 2 hours without pause, lost in the pure pleasure of expression. When I finally stopped, stretching my stiff fingers, I realized I hadn't once thought about whether anyone would read these words, whether they would please or disappoint, whether they served any purpose beyond the joy of their creation. That afternoon, I received an email from a local literary magazine, a small, well-respected publication featuring work by regional writers. They were hosting a reading series for emerging voices of all ages, with special interest in late bloomers. Vivian had submitted my name as a potential reader. "We find particular value in perspectives that have been ripened by time," the editor wrote. "Would you consider reading a short excerpt from your work in progress at our October event?" October was 3 months away. The thought of reading my words aloud to strangers sent a tremor of fear through me. What if they found my writing trivial, my insights shallow, my voice unremarkable? What if I stood at that microphone and saw boredom in the audience's eyes? I closed the email without responding, telling myself I needed time to consider. That evening, my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Wilson? This is Gabriela Martinez from Golden Years Magazine." I vaguely recognized the publication, a glossy monthly focused on retirement living, travel, and health issues for seniors. "Vivian Russo suggested I contact you," she continued. "We're doing a feature series on reinvention after 65, and your story sounds fascinating. Would you be interested in being interviewed?" Again, that flutter of fear. "I'm not sure. My story is all that remarkable," I hedged. "I've just bought a cottage and taken some classes." From what Vivian tells me, it's much more than that," Gabriella replied. "She says you're reclaiming yourself after decades of putting everyone else first. That's exactly the kind of inspiration our readers need." Inspiration? The word caught me off guard. I didn't feel inspirational. I felt tentative, uncertain, alternately brave and terrified. My transformation wasn't a tidy success story with a triumphant conclusion. It was messy, ongoing, full of missteps and moments of paralyzing doubt. I'm still in the middle of the journey, I told her. I don't have neat answers or 10 steps to reinvention. That's precisely why we want to feature you, she said. Too many stories about aging focus either on decline or on exceptional achievements. The 90-year-old, marathoner, the octogenarian who gets a PhD. We want to show the beautiful, messy middle where most of us actually live. The everyday courage of beginning again when society expects you to quietly fade away. Her words struck a chord. How many times had I wished for stories like mine during those first difficult weeks after hearing Michael's dismissal? How many women my age were silently wondering if it was too late to change course, to prioritize themselves, to become something new? I'll think about it, I promised. Can I let you know next week? Of course, she said. Take your time, but know that your story matters, especially to women who might see themselves in your experience. After we hung up, I sat in my emerald green armchair, watching darkness gather outside my windows. 2 opportunities in one day to share my story. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary in ways that needed acknowledgement. The familiar voice of doubt whispered, "Who are you to speak? What wisdom could you possibly offer?" But alongside it, a newer voice emerged. "Who are you not to speak? What if your ordinary courage helps someone else find theirs?" I thought of Sophia from my writing class, 82 and fearlessly documenting her loves and losses. I thought of Vivian, publishing her first poetry collection at 70. I thought of all the women I'd known who disappeared into caregiving roles. Their own dreams deferred indefinitely, their identities subsumed by others' needs. What if my small acts of reclamation created ripples? What if by speaking my truth, I helped another woman recognize hers? The next morning, I replied to both emails with a simple, yes. The weeks that followed brought a gentle rhythm to my new life. Mornings in the studio, alternating between writing and tentative experiments with paint. Afternoons exploring my neighborhood, the independent bookstore 3 blocks north, the cafe with live jazz on Wednesdays, the community garden where I secured a small plot for next spring's planting. My interview with Golden Years magazine was scheduled for mid-July. The literary reading would happen in October. Both loomed on my calendar like mountains in the distance, intimidating but also exhilarating, markers of a journey I was committed to completing. Michael called occasionally, our conversations brief and careful. He never mentioned the house. Fund again. Though Jennifer let slip during one call that they'd postponed their lakefront property search indefinitely. It wasn't the right time anyway, she said, a kindness I appreciated. Ethan, surprisingly, became my most consistent family contact. He texted me photos of his soccer matches, asked questions about my painting class, even requested my opinion on an English essay about Metamorphosis by Kafka. "You're the literary expert in the family," he wrote. "Plus, you know about transformation. And stuff." His casual acknowledgement of my changes warmed me. Youth, I was discovering, often accepts evolution more readily than middle age. Ethan hadn't fixed me in amber, hadn't assigned me a permanent identity that couldn't be altered without threatening his worldview. On a Tuesday evening in late June, I arrived at my painting class to find a guest instructor, a renowned local artist named Claire Fernandez, whose vibrant abstracts had been featured in galleries across the country. She was 60, with streaks of purple in her black hair and multiple piercings in each ear. Her energy filled the room immediately. "Today we're breaking rules," she announced. "Forget technique. Forget good art. Today is about expression, about making visible what lives inside you." She walked around the room, placing a large blank canvas before each student. "I want you to paint an emotion," she instructed, "not a representation." of it. A blue teardrip for sadness. A red heart for love. That's illustration, not expression. I want you to consider, if your joy could speak directly through color and movement, what would it say? If your grief could choose a shape, what would it be? I stared at my blank canvas, intimidated. My previous lessons had focused on fundamentals, color theory, basic brush techniques, simple still lifes. This assignment asked something far more vulnerable. Claire approached my easel. What emotion are you considering? I thought for a moment. Awakening, I said finally. It's not exactly an emotion, but it's what I feel most strongly right now. She nodded. Perfect. Now close your eyes. Where do you feel awakening in your body? What temperature is it? Does it move or stay? Still, what colors accompany it? I closed my eyes, concentrating. It starts here, I said, touching my sternum. It's warm, spreading outward. It moves like ripples in water. The colors shift, blues into greens into golds. Open your eyes, she said softly. Now paint that. Not what awakening looks like, but what it feels like inside you. For 2 hours, I painted without self-consciousness, without judgment, without concern for technique or outcome. I mixed colors intuitively, letting my body guide my choices. I created patterns that made no logical sense, but felt deeply right. When Claire called time, I stepped back from my canvas, surprised by what had emerged. It wasn't good art, by any conventional standard. The composition was unbalanced, the technique primitive. But something in those swirls of color, those intersecting lines, captured exactly what it felt like to be me in this moment of transformation. Messy, vibrant, uncertain, alive. Claire stopped at my easel during her final tour of the room. She studied my painting silently, head tilted. You've never painted before this class? I shook my head. Interesting, she murmured. There's something here. Raw, unpolished, but authentic. Would you consider joining my advanced experimental workshop? We meet on Thursday evenings. Advanced? But I'm a complete beginner. She smiled. Technical skill can be taught. Authentic expression is either present or it isn't. You have something to say, Eleanor. I'd like to help you say it more fluently. I left class that evening with my still wet canvas and a strange new feeling expanding in my chest. Pride, I realized. Not the reflected pride I'd felt in Michael's accomplishments or Ethan's talents, but pride in something I had created, something that came solely from me. At home, I propped the canvas against the wall in my studio and sat looking at it for a long time. In those abstract swirls of color, I saw myself emerging, not the self I had been, not even the self I would become, but the self I was right now, in this exquisite, terrifying, beautiful moment of becoming. I took a photo of the painting and, after a moment's hesitation, texted it to Michael with the simple caption, "My first real painting." His response came hours later. Interesting. Is it supposed to be something specific? I smiled at the phone. Of course he would look for representation, for something he could name and categorize. How could I explain that it was both nothing and everything? That it wasn't supposed to be anything except an expression of aliveness? I typed, "It's awakening." Then, because I was feeling brave, I added, "It's me." July brought heat that settled over the city like a weighted blanket. My cottage, with its old-fashioned windows and lack of central air, grew warm during the day. Rather than complain, I embraced the season's gifts. Morning painting sessions in my studio before the heat intensified, afternoons reading in the shade of the maple tree in my tiny backyard, evenings writing on my front porch as neighbors strolled by, often stopping to chat. I was becoming known in my new community, not as Michael's mother or Harold's widow, but simply as Eleanor, the writer with the colorful cottage, the beginner painter with the curious questions, the woman who brought homemade lemonade to the community garden workdays. The interview with Golden Years magazine loomed on my calendar. 3 days before the scheduled date, I received an email from the journalist, Gabriella. Would you be comfortable having a photographer accompany me? We'd love to feature you in your new space, perhaps with some of your artwork. My first instinct was to refuse. The cottage was still half finished, my paintings amateur at best. But a new voice inside me whispered, "Let them see the process. Let them see the beautiful mess of becoming." I replied with a simple, yes, then spent the next 2 days not tidying or hiding evidence of my transformation, but leaning into it. I set up my easel in the studio with a half-finished canvas. I left manuscript pages deliberately scattered across my desk. I arranged my collection of art books and writing guides prominently on shelves. The morning of the interview, I dressed in clothes that reflected my emerging self. Linen pants in a rich terracotta that matched my living room walls, a flowing tunic in deep teal, silver earrings handcrafted by a local artist I'd met at the indie farmer's market. I swept my silver-streaked hair into a loose knot, applied minimal makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman who gazed back wasn't young, wasn't perfect, wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she looked alive, interested, present. Her eyes held a spark that had been missing for years. Gabriella arrived precisely at 10, accompanied by a photographer named Ravi, a gentle-mannered man in his 30s who moved through my space with respectful awareness. They began with a tour of the cottage, Gabriella asking thoughtful questions about each room, each choice I'd made in creating this new home. "What made you choose these colors?" she asked, gesturing to the terracotta walls. "They make me feel warm, grounded," I replied. For years, I lived with neutral tones because they were safe, inoffensive. Now I'm surrounding myself with colors that energize me, that reflect parts of myself I've rediscovered. In the studio, Ravi photographed me at my easel, my hands slightly stained with paint from the morning's work. In the garden, he captured me kneeling beside my newly planted herbs. On the porch, he took shots of me with my notebook, the neighborhood visible behind me. When we finally sat for the formal interview, Gabriella's questions delved deeper than I'd anticipated. "What was the hardest part of making this change?" she asked. Not logistically, but emotionally. I considered the question carefully. Recognizing that I'd become complicit in my own diminishment, I said finally. It was painful to admit how much of myself I'd surrendered willingly, not just to motherhood or widowhood, but to a culture that expects women of a certain age to shrink, to need less, to take up less space. She nodded, making notes. "And your son's comment about you being too old to matter. Do you think he intended it to be as hurtful as it was?" "No," I said immediately. "Michael isn't deliberately cruel. But that almost makes it worse, doesn't it?" The casual nature of the dismissal, the unthinking way he reduced me to an inconvenience, it revealed how he truly saw me, without the filter of politeness. Some readers might think your response, buying a new home, redirecting the money you'd saved for his family, seems extreme or vindictive. How would you respond to that? The question gave me pause. Had my actions been fueled by hurt, by a desire to punish? I searched my heart before answering. I didn't make these changes to hurt Michael, I said slowly. I made them because his words shattered an illusion I'd been carefully maintaining. The illusion that my self-sacrifice was still meaningful, still seen and valued. Once that illusion broke, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep pouring myself into a relationship that had become fundamentally unbalanced. And the money? The house fund? The money was always mine, I said simply. I earned it, saved it, managed it. I had intended it as a gift, but gifts shouldn't come at the cost of the giver's well-being. I needed that money to build a life, that could sustain me through whatever years remain. A life with purpose, with creative engagement, with new connections. Gabriella smiled. That's a powerful distinction between gifts freely given and self-sacrifice that depletes the giver. It took me 68 years to learn it, I admitted. I hope your readers might learn it sooner. After 3 hours, Gabriella closed her notebook. Thank you, Eleanor. Your story is exactly what we hoped for. Not a fairy tale of reinvention, but an honest account of reclamation, of remembering that it's never too late to become more fully yourself. After they left, I felt strangely energized rather than drained. The act of articulating my journey, of naming the shifts occurring within me, had clarified something essential. This wasn't a temporary reaction to hurt feelings. It wasn't a phase or a crisis. It was a fundamental realignment of how I existed in the world. That evening, I received an unexpected text from Jennifer, my daughter-in-law. Ethan mentioned you're being interviewed for a magazine? That's wonderful. What's the story about? I hesitated before responding. Jennifer had always been kind, had often served as buffer between Michael and me. But her loyalty, understandably, lay with her husband. It's a piece about starting new chapters later in life, I replied, keeping it simple. Good for you. When does it come out? We'd love to see it. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine. I wondered if she truly understood what the article would reveal. Not just my new cottage and creative pursuits, but the painful catalyst that had launched this transformation. Would she recognize her husband in my descriptions? Would she feel defensive on his behalf? September issue, I texted back. I'll make sure you get a copy. The following week brought my first session in Claire's advanced experimental painting workshop. The other participants were a diverse group. A former surgeon now exploring abstract expressionism, a young mother channeling the chaos of parenting into vibrant canvases, a retired architect creating meticulous geometric compositions. I felt profoundly out of place among these skilled artists until Claire gathered us in a circle for introductions. Before we share names or backgrounds, she instructed, I want each of you to complete this sentence. The question I'm asking through my art is... The surgeon went first. The question I'm asking through my art is, how do we make peace with human fragility? The young mother. The question I'm asking through my art is, where do I exist in the spaces between giving? The architect. The question I'm asking through my art is, can order and chaos coexist in harmony? When my turn came, I spoke without overthinking. The question I'm asking through my art is, who am I when no one needs me to be anything in particular? Claire nodded, satisfied. That, she said, is why you belong in this workshop. The technical skills will come. The essential question is already present. That evening's session focused on creating from intuition rather than planning. Claire had us select colors blindfolded, apply paint using unconventional tools, twigs, folded paper, our fingers, and work in rapid bursts with minimal reflection. The results were messy, chaotic, surprisingly revealing. My canvas emerged as a storm of deep blues and purples punctuated by flashes of gold, turbulent yet alive, with possibility. The architect studied it thoughtfully during our group critique. There's something archetypal here, he observed. Like a creation story, chaos before order, darkness before light. His words resonated deeply. I was living in that creative chaos, that productive darkness where new forms take shape before emerging into light. I photographed my canvas before leaving, feeling a growing urge to document this journey not just in words but in images. On impulse, I created an Instagram account when I got home, naming it Eleanor's Awakening. I posted the photo with a simple caption, Chaos Before Creation, Day 1 of finding my artistic voice at 68. I had no expectations, no understanding of hashtags or social media strategy. I simply felt moved to share this small step in my evolution. The next morning, I was surprised to find several likes and comments, mostly from fellow workshop participants, but also from a few strangers. One comment in particular caught my attention. "I'm 62 and afraid to start painting because I'll never be any good. Your courage inspires me to reconsider what good really means. Thank you for sharing this." I stared at those words for a long time, marveling at how our actions ripple outward in ways we cannot anticipate. By simply documenting my stumbling attempts at self-expression, I had somehow encouraged another woman to question her own self-limiting beliefs. I replied, "The joy is in the discovery, not the mastery. I'd love to see what emerges when you begin." Over the next weeks, I posted regularly, not just paintings, but glimpses of my writing process, photos of my evolving cottage, snapshots of my garden's first tentative sprouts. Nothing polished or perfect, just authentic documentation of a life in transformation. My follower count grew slowly but steadily. Mostly women, mostly my age or approaching it. They left comments that often brought tears to my eyes. "You've given me permission to consider what I want in this next chapter. I've been invisible for so long even to myself. Your journey is helping me see possibilities again. My husband died last year. I've been existing, not living. Tomorrow I'm signing up for a pottery class." Each comment reinforced what Gabriella had suggested, that my ordinary courage might help someone else find theirs. Not because my journey was exceptional, but precisely because it wasn't. Because it reflected struggles and questions common to so many women who had spent decades defining themselves through service to others. August arrived with thunderstorms that cooled the city briefly before leaving it steaming in their wake. I developed a new routine: early mornings in the garden before the heat became unbearable, late mornings writing, afternoons experimenting with painting techniques, evenings reading or attending community events. Michael called occasionally, our conversations gradually lengthening, becoming less awkward. He seemed genuinely interested in my painting workshop, asking specific questions about techniques and materials. During one call, he mentioned that Jennifer followed my Instagram account. "She showed me your recent posts," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You seem different. Happier, maybe." "I am," I confirmed. "Not because everything is perfect or easy, but because I'm living more authentically. I'm allowing myself to want things, to try things, to be seen." He was quiet for a moment. "I worry sometimes," he finally admitted. "About money, about you being alone in that neighborhood, about what happens if you get sick or need help." His concerns were valid, yet they revealed how he still viewed me, as vulnerable, as potentially dependent, as someone to be managed rather than someone making her own informed choices. "I understand those worries," I said gently. "But Michael, I've made careful financial plans. I've created a community here who checks on me daily. I'm probably healthier now, walking everywhere, gardening, actively engaged, than I was living, alone in the suburbs." "Still," he persisted, "what if something happens?" "Something will happen, eventually," I acknowledged. "That's the nature of life. But I'd rather spend whatever time I have living fully than preparing for worst-case scenarios." He sighed, unconvinced but unwilling to argue. "Ethan wants to visit your cottage. Maybe bring a friend. Would that be okay?" The request surprised and touched me. "Of course, I'd love that." The following Saturday, Ethan arrived with his friend, Zach, both lanky 16-year-olds with that particular teenage energy that fills spaces with both awkwardness and vitality. I had prepared lunch, keeping it simple: homemade pizza, fresh fruit, lemonade. "Your house is actually really cool, Grandma," Ethan declared, wandering through the rooms. "It's like, not old person style at all." I laughed. "What exactly is old person style?" He gestured vaguely. You know beige, doilies, furniture covered in plastic? Boring. Well, I'm glad to defy expectations. The boys devoured the pizza, then asked to see my studio. I showed them my recent paintings, explaining Claire's experimental approaches, the questions we explored through color and texture. This is my favorite, Zach said, pointing to a small canvas where I'd attempted to capture the feeling of dawn breaking, pale pinks and golds emerging from deep indigo. It feels hopeful. His insight surprised me. That's exactly what I was trying to express. Can we try? Ethan asked suddenly. Painting, I mean. Would that be okay? For the next 2 hours, I guided the boys through a simple exercise in abstract expression, encouraging them to paint feelings rather than objects. Their energy transformed. My small studio, filling it with laughter, questions, splashes of vibrant color. They approached the canvas without self-consciousness, without the critical voice that so often silences adults' creativity. When they finished, both proudly displayed canvases that pulsed with teenage intensity. Ethan's a riot of reds and oranges, Zach's a more controlled study in blues and greens. These are wonderful, I told them sincerely. Would you like to take them home? Ethan hesitated. Actually, could I leave mine here? Dad might think it's weird. His words carried a familiar weight. How often had I censored my own expression, my own desires, fearing they might seem weird to others? How many authentic impulses had I suppressed to appear normal, acceptable, appropriate? Your painting has a home here for as long as you want, I assured him. And so do you. After the boys left, I photographed their canvases and posted them on Instagram with the caption, "The fearless expression of youth." My grandson and his friend reminded me today that creativity thrives when we silence the inner critic. The post received more engagement than anything I'd shared previously. Comments flooded in from other grandparents, from art teachers, from people of all ages who recognized the precious freedom of creating without judgment. One comment in particular stood out. I'm an art therapist working with seniors. The joy on these young faces alongside their artwork beautifully illustrates what we try to recapture in our sessions, that pure creative impulse that exists before we learn to doubt ourselves. Thank you for this intergenerational inspiration. Intergenerational inspiration. The phrase settled in my heart, opening a new vista of possibility. Perhaps this journey wasn't just about reclaiming myself, but about creating bridges. Between who I had been and who I was becoming. Between generations with their different perspectives. Between women separated by geography but united in common experience. The September issue of Golden Years magazine arrived in my mailbox on a Wednesday morning. My hands trembled slightly as I removed it from its protective plastic sleeve. The cover featured a striking image of a silver-haired woman standing on a mountain summit, arms outstretched. Not me, but a perfect visual metaphor for the journey the issue explored. I found my article in the center spread, 6 full pages with Ravi's beautiful photographs scattered throughout. The headline read, "The Courage to Begin Again, How Eleanor Wilson Reclaimed Her Life at 68. The first photograph was a full-page shot of me in my studio, morning light streaming through the windows, illuminating my hands as they moved across a canvas. My face was captured in profile, intense concentration evident in every line. I looked formidable, present, fully engaged. Gabriella's writing was sensitive and nuanced, capturing both the pain that had catalyzed my transformation and the joy I was discovering in the process. She had quoted me accurately, preserving the complexity of my feelings about Michael, about aging, about society's expectations for older women. The article concluded with words I didn't remember saying, yet recognized as deeply true. The greatest gift I've given myself is permission to want, to create, to take up space, to be imperfect, yet visible. I spent decades making myself smaller to accommodate others' comfort. Now I'm allowing myself to expand, to explore the fullness of who I might still become. It's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But mostly, it feels like coming home to myself after a very long absence. I ordered 5 copies to be shipped to my cottage. 1 for my writing portfolio, 1 for Michael's family, 1 for my sister in Arizona, and 2 extras for friends. Then I drove to the local bookstore and purchased their entire stock, 12 copies, which I plan to share with my writing group, my painting workshop, and the community garden committee. That afternoon, I posted a single image on Instagram, the full-page studio photograph, with the caption, "Surreal to see myself through someone else's lens." September issue of Golden Years magazine, on newsstands now. My story isn't extraordinary, but it's authentically mine. May it encourage someone else to claim theirs. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments and messages flooded in faster than I could read them. Women sharing their own moments of awakening, their fears about starting over, their gratitude for seeing a path forward modeled by someone who looked like them. By evening, my follower count had jumped from a few hundred to over 1,000. The magazine's social media accounts had shared my post, amplifying its reach beyond my small circle. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications until I finally silenced it, feeling simultaneously exhilarated and overwhelmed by the attention. I was sipping tea on my porch, watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk, when a car pulled up in front of my cottage. Michael stepped out, looking uncertain. My heart quickened. I hadn't expected him today, hadn't prepared myself for this encounter. "Mom," he called, approaching the porch steps. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. He sat awkwardly, hands clasped between his knees. "Jennifer bought the magazine," he said after a moment. "She left it open on the kitchen counter. I read the article." I waited, giving him space to continue. "Is that really how you felt?" he asked finally. "Invisible? Erased?" The directness of his question caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps anger at being portrayed as the catalyst for my transformation. Instead, he seemed genuinely disturbed by the pain I'd described. "Yes," I said simply. "Not all at once, but gradually. Each shortened phone call, each forgotten birthday, each moment where my thoughts or feelings were dismissed as outdated or irrelevant. They accumulated over time." He winced. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," I acknowledged. "That's what made it harder to name, in a way. It wasn't deliberate cruelty. It was unconscious discounting. It was assuming I existed only in relation to your needs, your convenience, your life." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the fireflies blink on and off in the yard. When he spoke again, his voice was subdued. "The thing is, Mom, I read that article, and I barely recognized you. The woman in those photographs, the woman quoted talking about creative expression and taking up space. She's so different from the mother I've known all my life." His words hung in the air between us. I considered them carefully before responding. "I'm both, Michael. I'm the mother who raised you, who put your needs first, who shaped her life around your well-being. And I'm this woman who's reclaiming parts of herself that got set aside during those years. Neither version is more authentic than the other. They're both me. I guess I never thought about you having, I don't know, a self separate from being my mom. That sounds terrible when I say it out loud." "It's honest," I said. "And it's common. Children naturally see their parents primarily in relation to themselves. But Michael, I was a complete person before you were born. I had dreams, talents, interests, a self that existed independently. Motherhood didn't erase that self, it just redirected my energy for a time." "A long time," he noted. "Yes, a choice I made willingly and don't regret. But now I'm choosing differently." He nodded slowly. Ethan can't stop talking about painting with you. He's asked for art supplies for his birthday. The change of subject surprised me, until I realized it wasn't really a change at all. It was Michael's way of acknowledging something important, that I was influencing his son not just as a grandmother, but as an artist, as someone pursuing passion later in life. He has natural intuition for color, I said. Both boys do. Jennifer wants to see your studio sometime. She's always wanted to try painting, but says she doesn't have a creative bone in her body. I smiled. That's what I thought too. Turns out creativity isn't about innate talent. It's about permission and practice. She's welcome anytime. Michael stood, moving toward the porch steps. Then he paused, turning back to face me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what I said at Ethan's party. For not seeing you clearly. For assuming you'd always be there in exactly the way I wanted. When I wanted. The apology, unexpected and unqualified, brought sudden tears to my eyes. I blinked them away, not wanting to fall into familiar patterns of emotional caretaking. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot to me. He nodded, looking uncomfortable but determined. The lakefront house. It was a nice dream, but it wasn't a necessity. We're fine where we are for now. I want you to use that money for whatever helps you become more of who you want to be. His blessing, while touching, was also unnecessary. I had already made my decision, already committed to this path. But I recognized the gift he was offering, not financial, but emotional. Permission I didn't need, but whose offering signified growth on his part. I appreciate that, Michael. I think we're both learning new ways to see each other. After he left, I remained on the porch until the fireflies faded and stars emerged in the clear night sky. His visit had touched me deeply, yet I felt a curious sense of detachment from his approval or understanding. It mattered, yes, but it no longer defined me. My journey would continue regardless, enriched by reconciliation, certainly, but not dependent on it. The realization felt like another threshold crossed, another layer of old identity gently released. I was becoming a woman whose worth wasn't measured by others' validation, whose choices weren't limited by others' comfort, whose story wasn't written by others' expectations. I was becoming, simply and profoundly, myself. The January gallery opening arrived on a night when snow fell in thick, silent flakes, transforming the city into a wonderland of soft edges and muffled sounds. I stood before my bathroom mirror, applying lipstick in a shade of deep rose I'd never have chosen a year earlier, assessing the woman reflected back at me. My hair, once carefully colored to hide the gray, now shimmered naturally silver, styled in a short, modern cut that framed my face with surprising flattery. The lines around my eyes and mouth had deepened over these transformative months, not from worry or exhaustion as before, but from genuine smiles, from squinting in concentration, at canvases, from the full expression of a life being thoroughly lived. I wore a silk tunic in vibrant teal over black pants, accessorized with handcrafted silver jewelry purchased from an artist at the downtown market. Not the careful, conservative outfit I'd have chosen for a public event in my previous life, but clothing that expressed my emerging identity, colorful, creative, unapologetically present. "You look beautiful," Jennifer said when she arrived to drive me to the gallery. She'd insisted on accompanying me, sensing my nerves despite my protestations, that I'd be fine alone. "Beautiful?" I laughed softly. "At 68? "Especially at 68, she affirmed. "There's something captivating about a woman who's fully inhabited her own skin." Her words stayed with me as we drove through the snowy streets toward Riverside Gallery, a converted warehouse space in the city's revitalized arts district. Beauty not as the smooth perfection of youth, but as the authentic embodiment of a self fully realized. The idea felt revolutionary. The gallery was already crowded when we arrived. not just with the usual art scene regulars, but with a diverse cross-section of the community. Claire had deliberately curated beginnings, artists who started after 60, to challenge perceptions about creativity and age, and the audience reflected that mission. Young art students mingled with retirees. Established artists chatted with complete novices. Families with children wandered among the exhibits, pointing and discussing. My 3 paintings were displayed on a wall near the center of the gallery, lit expertly to highlight their textural elements. Seeing them in this professional context, framed, illuminated, presented as worthy of serious consideration, sent a peculiar thrill through me. They looked simultaneously familiar and strange, intimate yet newly public. A small placard beside them bore my name and a brief artist statement Claire had helped me craft. Eleanor Wilson, B. 1956, began painting at age 68 following a lifelong career in education. Her work explores themes of awakening, transformation, and the courage required to begin again. Wilson works primarily in acrylics, incorporating mixed media elements that represent layers of experience and memory. Threshold, featured in this exhibition, marks her gallery debut. I stood slightly apart from my displayed work, observing viewers' reactions. Most paused briefly before moving on, the typical gallery experience. But some lingered, leaning closer to examine details, stepping back to absorb the overall composition, returning for a second or third look. A young woman with purple-streaked hair stood before Threshold for nearly 10 minutes, her expression contemplative, occasionally nodding as if in silent conversation with the painting. "Your work is connecting," Jennifer whispered, squeezing my arm gently. "Watch how people are responding." Claire appeared at my side, elegant in a sculptural black dress, her silver hair swept into an artistic updo. "Come," she said, taking my elbow. "There are people you should meet." She guided me through the crowd, introducing me to gallery owners, arts journalists, fellow artists, and collectors. I shook hands, answered questions about my process, accepted both compliments, and thoughtful critiques with equal gratitude. The conversations were exhilarating, challenging me to articulate intuitive choices, to consider my work from new perspectives, to imagine possibilities I hadn't yet explored. One introduction particularly struck me. Claire guided me toward an elderly woman seated regally in a wheelchair, impeccably dressed in a violet suit, her white hair arranged in a perfect French twist. "Eleanor, I'd like you to meet Imogene Caldwell," Claire said with evident respect. "Imogene, this is Eleanor Wilson, the artist I mentioned." The name registered immediately. Imogene Caldwell was a local legend, a painter whose bold abstracts had gained international recognition, whose work hung in major museums, whose artistic career spanned nearly 7 decades. "Ms. Caldwell," I began, feeling suddenly tongue-tied. "It's an honor." "Imogene, please," she interrupted, her voice surprisingly strong despite her fragile appearance. "I detest formality between artists. Sit with me a moment, would you? These old legs don't allow for much gallery wandering these days." I sat in the empty chair beside her wheelchair, aware of the extraordinary privilege of this conversation. "Claire tells me you began painting only months ago," Imogene said, studying me intently, after hearing words that might have crushed a less resilient spirit. I nodded, surprised that Claire had shared that personal detail. "Good," Imogene declared unexpectedly. "Pain is a powerful catalyst when properly channeled. Tell me about Threshold." "The integration of text elements beneath the paint layers. What are those fragments?" "Pages from journals I kept during my teaching years," I explained. "Dreams I'd set aside, ideas I'd postponed for someday. I wanted to honor them as the foundation for what's emerging now." She nodded approvingly. "Most people waste pain. They let it diminish them, close them down. You've done the opposite. The technical skills will develop with time, but the authentic voice, that's already present in your work." Coming from a woman of her stature, these words felt like a benediction. Not empty praise, but a genuine recognition of something valuable in my artistic expression. "May I ask you something personal?" I ventured. "At my age, personal loses its sting," she chuckled. "Ask away." "Did you ever feel that time was working against you? That you'd started too late or had too much to learn?" Imogene laughed, a surprisingly girlish sound from her aged frame. "My dear, I'm 92. I still feel that way with each new canvas. The difference is, I no longer care. The urgency of limited time becomes freedom when you accept it." "Freedom," I repeated, considering the concept. "Precisely. The young artist fears judgment, worries about career trajectory, frets over marketplace trends. At our age, we can create purely from necessity, from the bone-deep understanding that expression matters more than reception." She leaned forward slightly. "You have perhaps 15-20 good years ahead if health permits. How will you spend them? Worrying about what you don't yet know or celebrating what only you can express?" Her question hung between us, profound in its simplicity. Before I could respond, a gallery assistant approached, informing Imogene that a prominent collector wished to speak with her. "Remember," she said, clasping my hand briefly before being wheeled away, "late bloomers often produce the most interesting flowers." The encounter left me thoughtful, energized in a way I hadn't anticipated. Imogene embodied a future I'd never imagined for myself. Vital, engaged, creating with purpose well into her 9th decade. Her words about freedom particularly resonated. What if my late start wasn't a disadvantage, but a unique position of liberty? What if the limited time ahead wasn't a constraint, but an invitation to create without the burden of expectation or ambition? As the evening progressed, I noticed a small cluster of women gathered near my paintings, participants from my Sunday creativity circles, along with several who had registered for my upcoming courses. They waved me over, eyes bright with excitement. "Eleanor, this is incredible," said Margot, a retired nurse who had discovered a passion for collage in our sessions. "Seeing your work here, knowing where you started just months ago, it makes me believe anything is possible." "We're so proud of you," added Beth, a recently divorced grandmother who had joined our circles initially just to get out of the house, but who now filled sketchbooks with increasingly confident drawings. "You're blazing a trail for all of us." Their genuine enthusiasm touched me deeply. These women weren't merely being supportive. They were finding personal meaning in my journey, seeing reflections of their own possibilities in my experience. The realization humbled me that my individual transformation could somehow catalyze others' courage. The highlight of the evening came unexpectedly. Claire clinked a glass for attention, gathering attendees for brief remarks about the exhibition. After introducing the concept and thanking supporters, she announced something I hadn't anticipated. "We're pleased to share that 3 works from this exhibition have already sold before the official opening. Among them, Eleanor Wilson's Threshold, purchased by an anonymous collector who left this note. This piece speaks to exactly where I find myself at 71. No longer what I was, not yet what I'm becoming. Thank you for making the invisible journey visible." A ripple of applause moved through the crowd. I stood frozen in disbelief. Someone had purchased my painting, not from charity or personal connection, but because it spoke to their experience, because it held value beyond my own process of creation. Jennifer squeezed my hand excitedly. "Eleanor, you've sold your first painting!" The joy that flooded through me had nothing to do with the modest payment that would come. It was the profound satisfaction of communication across the boundary, of self, of creating something that resonated in another's heart, that articulated an experience beyond words. As the exhibition began winding down, Michael and Ethan arrived, having come directly from Ethan's basketball game. They moved immediately to my paintings, Michael studying them with newfound appreciation, Ethan explaining techniques to his father with the enthusiasm of a co-conspirator. "Sorry we missed most of the opening," Michael said, embracing me warmly. "Ethan's game went into overtime, but we wouldn't have missed seeing your work displayed like this. It's remarkable, Mom." "Someone bought Threshold," I told them, still slightly dazed by the reality. "Of course they did," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "It's the best one. Who wouldn't want it?" His unquestioning confidence in the value of my work, so different from the dismissive teenager who might have rolled his eyes at his grandmother's creative endeavors just months earlier, felt like yet another marker of how much had shifted. Later that night, back in my cottage with a cup of chamomile tea, I reflected on the evening, the conversations, the connections, Imogene's wisdom, the unexpected sale. Something profound had occurred, something beyond the validation of having work displayed publicly or purchased by a stranger. I had stepped fully into a new identity, not tentatively, not apologetically, but with conviction. I was an artist, I was a writer, I was a teacher of creative recovery. Not because someone else had bestowed these titles, but because I had claimed them through action, through persistence, through the courage to begin without guarantee of success. The cottage phone rang, interrupting my reflections. Few people had this number. I primarily used my cell phone, so the late call surprised me. "Eleanor, it's Claire. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. I'm still too wired from the evening to sleep." "As you should be," she laughed. "Listen, something's come up that I wanted to discuss immediately. Imogene Caldwell was quite taken with your work and with you personally. I was honored by our conversation," I said. "She's extraordinary." "She is, and she's also quite influential. She's been mentoring selected artists for decades, usually one or two at a time, mostly women, often those who've come to their practice through unconventional paths." My heart began beating faster, anticipating what might be coming. "She's asked if you'd be interested in joining her studio one morning a week. Not formal lessons exactly, more an opportunity to work alongside her, to observe her process, to engage in the kind of artistic dialogue that accelerates growth." I sat down abruptly, overwhelmed by the offer. "But I'm a complete beginner. Surely there are more advanced artists who'd benefit more from her guidance." "That's not how Imogene sees it," Claire replied. "She's particularly interested in artists at the beginning of significant personal evolutions. She says it's when the most interesting work happens, before too much technical training can smooth away the rawness of authentic expression." I thought of Imogene's words about freedom, about the unique position of the late bloomer. When would this begin? "Next week, if you're amenable. Tuesdays 9 a.m. to noon. Her studio is in her home in the historic district. I can email you the details." "Yes," I said, not allowing myself time for doubt or hesitation. "Please tell her I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my cottage, acutely aware of how unimaginable this moment would have been a year earlier. From a woman dismissed as too old to matter to an artist being mentored by one of the city's most respected creative figures, the trajectory was too extraordinary to have been predicted. Yet it hadn't happened by magic or luck. It had happened through deliberate choices, through the decision to transmute pain into possibility, through the courage to begin without knowing where the path might lead. The next morning brought unexpected news that tested this newfound identity. An email from Gabriella at Golden Years magazine contained both an opportunity and a challenge. "Eleanor, your feature has generated unprecedented response from readers. We've received hundreds of letters and emails from women inspired by your journey. Our publisher would like to offer you a regular column, Beginning Again, focusing on transformation and creative awakening in later life. Monthly, 1,500 words, with the potential for compilation into a book if readership continues strong. Are you interested? A monthly column, a potential book, regular income from writing. The opportunity exceeded anything I'd imagined when I first sat down to process my hurt through words on a page. Yet it also presented a fundamental question. Could I sustain both emerging paths, writing and visual art, while maintaining the quality and authenticity of each? Could I continue teaching creativity courses, hosting Sunday circles, developing my technical skills with Imogene's mentorship, and produce thoughtful monthly columns? The old Eleanor would have said yes immediately, would have stretched herself thin to accommodate others' expectations, would have worried primarily about disappointing someone by declining an opportunity. The woman I was becoming paused, considered. Her actual capacity reflected on what would bring the most meaningful growth. After careful thought, I replied, Gabriella, I'm deeply honored by this offer and the response from your readers. I'd like to propose an alternative that might better serve both my current path and your readers' interests. Instead of a monthly column solely written by me, what about a quarterly feature that includes my reflections but also highlights other women's transformation stories? This would provide diverse perspectives while allowing me to maintain focus on my developing art practice and teaching. I'd be happy to help curate these stories and provide editorial guidance. I sent the email, then turned off my computer and headed to my studio. Whatever the response, I had acted from integrity rather than obligation, from clarity about my priorities rather than fear of missing an opportunity. That afternoon, my first official Creativity After 50 class began. 12 women gathered in my expanded studio space, the cottage's spare bedroom now converted to accommodate small groups, with easels, a long work table, and comfortable seating for discussions. The participants ranged in age from 52 to 78. Some came with specific creative goals, completing a long-abandoned novel, learning watercolor techniques, developing a portfolio of textile art. Others came with vaguer intentions, rediscovering joy, exploring self-expression, finding community with like-minded women. All carried some version of the same internal barriers: self-doubt, perfectionism, fear of judgment, uncertainty about whether their creative impulses deserved time and resources. I began not with instruction in technique, but with a ritual of permission. Each woman received a handcrafted journal and a simple silver charm in the shape of a door key. This key represents permission, I explained, not granted by me or anyone else, but recognized and claimed by you. Permission to create imperfectly. Permission to prioritize your creative expression. Permission to begin exactly where you are, without prerequisites or justifications. We spent the first hour sharing stories, moments when creative impulses had been discouraged or abandoned, times when we'd silenced our own voices to accommodate others' expectations, experiences of believing we weren't real artists or real writers because we lacked formal training or external validation. The commonalities in our narratives were striking despite our diverse backgrounds. Nearly every woman recalled a specific moment in childhood or adolescence when a creative effort had been criticized or dismissed. Many described decades of putting others' needs ahead of their own creative calling. All expressed some version of the insidious thought, "Who am I to think I could create something worthwhile?" After sharing these stories, acknowledging the barriers that had constrained us, we performed a simple but powerful exercise. Each woman wrote her most limiting belief about her creative capacity on a slip of paper. We gathered in the garden, despite the winter chill, and burned these papers in a small ceramic bowl, watching our self-imposed limitations transform to ash. This doesn't magically eliminate these thoughts, I cautioned as we watched the papers curl and blacken. They'll return, probably daily. But this ritual helps us recognize them as constructed barriers rather than objective truths. Each time these thoughts arise, imagine them burning away, making space for possibility. Back in the warm studio, we turned to the practical aspects of creative recovery, establishing sustainable practices, creating physical and temporal spaces for creative work, developing resilience against both external criticism and internal sabotage. The world will not make room for your creative life, I told them, echoing wisdom Imogene had shared in our brief conversation. You must claim that space deliberately, unapologetically, repeatedly. This isn't selfishness. It's self-reclamation. By the session's end, something had shifted in the room's energy. The women who gathered their belongings and prepared to leave moved differently than those who had arrived 3 hours earlier. Shoulders straighter, expressions more animated, voices stronger as they discussed plans for their week's creative practice. One participant, a retired physician named Helen, lingered after the others had departed. I need to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For 23 years, I've been saying I'll start painting when I have time. My husband died last spring. Suddenly, I had nothing but time, yet I still couldn't begin. I was paralyzed by the fear of creating something mediocre after a career where excellence was the only acceptable standard. She gestured to the simple color study she'd completed during our session. Nothing extraordinary technically, just an exploration of how blues transitioned into greens with varying amounts of yellow. This little exercise, it's nothing special objectively, but it's the first thing I've created since winning an art competition in 10th grade. The first time I've allowed myself to make something without knowing it would be good enough. And it feels monumental. Her words crystallized something I'd been sensing throughout the class. That the most significant barriers to creativity weren't technical, but psychological. That the journey of creative recovery was fundamentally about permission, about silencing the voices, internal and external, that told us we had no right to express ourselves, that our efforts weren't worthwhile unless they achieved some externally defined standard of excellence. Beginning is the hardest part, I said, squeezing her hand. You've already overcome the most difficult barrier. After Helen left, I remained in the studio, reflecting on how profoundly my life had transformed in the months since hearing Michael's dismissive words. From that painful catalyst had emerged not just personal renewal, but a widening circle of impact. Women finding courage through my example, readers connecting with my story, students rediscovering creative joy, even family relationships healing, and reconfiguring around a more authentic version of myself. The pain had been real, the grief necessary, but they had been doorways, not destinations. Gabriella's response to my counter-proposal arrived that evening. Eleanor, your suggestion is brilliant and aligns perfectly with our evolving vision for the magazine. A quarterly feature highlighting diverse transformation journeys, curated by you, would provide tremendous value to our readers while honoring your current priorities. Our publisher is enthusiastic about the potential book project evolving from this approach. Let's schedule a call to discuss details. The news brought a wave of satisfaction different from what I'd felt at the gallery opening. This wasn't about external validation, but about successful self-advocacy, about having the confidence to propose an alternative that served both the magazine's needs and my own priorities. The following morning, I woke early, drawn to my studio by first light illuminating fresh snow. I stood before a blank canvas, brush in hand, considering Imogene's question. How would I spend the 15 or 20 good years that might remain? Worrying about what I didn't yet know, or celebrating what only I could express? The answer came not in words, but in action, in the first brushstroke of a new painting, in the commitment to a path whose destination remained gloriously unknown, in the daily choice to create from authenticity rather than fear. I titled this new canvas, Becoming, and worked on it through the morning, losing myself in the conversation between hand and eye, between intention and intuition, between who I had been and who I was still becoming. Later, I would meet with the Women's Art Collective from Chicago to discuss their touring exhibition. I would review submissions for the next Beginning Again feature. I would prepare materials for tomorrow's session with Imogene. I would continue writing the memoir that was evolving alongside my transformation. But in this moment, there was only the canvas, the color, the light streaming through windows I had chosen, illuminating a life I was authoring with each deliberate choice. Michael's words, "She's too old to matter now," had once shattered my sense of place and purpose. Now they seemed almost like a blessing, a necessary disruption that had cracked open the shell of a too small life, allowing something more authentic, more vibrant, more meaningful to emerge. I was 68 years old, standing at what many would consider life's twilight. Yet from where I stood, paintbrush in hand, surrounded by evidence of creative awakening, it felt unmistakably like dawn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.